Hey everyone, welcome back to the next episode of the Weekly Coder. I'm Chris, and in this episode we are going to continue, of course, from where we left off with our Conway's Game of Life. The last episode we created a save dialog, and in this episode we are going to create a load dialog. So this one should go much faster because we are going to use the power of copy and save. So what we're going to do here is just go ahead and expand out our canvas and check out our save dialog game object. So what we're going to do first is we're going to right click and just duplicate. So now we've got another one down here called save dialog 1. So we're going to rename this to load dialog. And so that we can work with it, we are going to enable it, and we are going to remove the save dialog component, the script that we created, because obviously this is for loading and not for saving. So the first thing we'll do is we'll change our text. We'll change that to load pattern. And we'll get rid of this pattern name input because we're going to replace it with a drop down. So we're at 250 and 30 for the width and height, and we're at 14 for position. So let's go ahead and come back and right click and click on UI and drop down. And we're going to change this to 14. And I think we said 250 for the width, just so that we stay consistent. And we're going to leave the options as they are right now. We're not going to mess with those. And we need to go ahead and change the save button to actually be called load button. So we'll go down here to the text property, or the text object, and change this to load. This will still be a quit button, so we can leave that as X. And we need to rename a few things. We can keep background border image, background title image, title text. Save button we'll rename to load button. Quit button stays, drop down, we'll call this, you know what, let's just leave it drop down. There's nothing else to confuse us what this might be, so we'll just call this drop down. So what we need to do for the load is, in order for us to load a an image, or sorry, a pattern, we're not going to use, we're not going to free type in whatever the name of the file is. Although we could do that, and that would be easier than to try and populate this dropdown. But since we want to do things the right way and the easy way, we're going to actually populate the options of this dropdown via script. So one of the things we need to do first, though, is we need to go in here, and right here it says missing object. We're going to replace that with load dialog, but not until we actually create our load dialog class. So let's go in here to scripts and create a C# script. We'll call this one load dialog. And let's open it up. And of course it's empty other than our start and update methods. We're not going to need our update method, so let's drop that. We are going to need to include the Unity Engine UI. Okay. And then what we'll need is we are going to need to create a reference to our dropdown for when we load it, and that's going to be pattern name, right? Because whatever's selected on a dropdown is what we're going to load. And then we are going to create a method, and we're going to call this reload options. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to traverse the file system. So we'll also need Unity Engine.io, system.io. Anytime you want to do any kind of disk access stuff, saving files, loading files, you'll need to make sure that you include the system.io namespace so that you have access to those classes. So what we're going to start with here is we're going to create a list, and that is going to be of type string because we're going to store all of our file names, and that is instantiated by using new list, and we're going to pass in string as the type. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an array of strings. So those will be all the file paths that we're going to traverse over, and that is going to be populated by the getFiles method, right? And we're going to pass in our patterns path that is where all of our files are being saved. So what we need to do here is we need to say for int I equals 0, I is less than file paths dot length and increment I. So what this for loop is going to do is it's actually going to loop over all of the files that are in the file paths array, and from there we'll be able to then individually grab the file names and parse them however we like, and add them to the options or whatever we want to do. So here what we're going to do is we're going to say string file name, because we want to store the file name in a variable. File paths I, which is the current index of the array. Substring, we're going to get file paths I last index of, and we're going to get slash. So basically what that is going to do is going to get the last index of the slash. So where the slash last happened, right? So that's going to be the file name. So instead of getting pattern slash test.xml, we're just going to get test.xml. So now what we want to do is we want to separate out the extension from the file name because we don't need to show the extension, right? So we do string extension equals system.io.path. And the reason that we're doing this, and I'll tell you in a second, because we don't really need this, but this is just a precautionary measure. So what we'll do is we are getting the extension. And the reason that we're doing that is because sometimes the extension is 3 characters, sometimes it's 2 characters, sometimes it's 4 characters. We don't know how long the extension is going to be, and we need to know how long the extension is going to be for this next portion here. So what we're going to say is the file name that we got is going to equal to file name, oops, but a substring of that, and the substring is going to start at 0, and it's going to take file name dot length minus the extension length. So that's why we need to know what the extension is, because we need to be able to subtract the extension from the file name so that we can get the file name without the extension. In our case, we're appending that .xml file when we save our file. So no matter what, the extension's always going to be 3 characters. But this is kind of future-proofing it in case we decide to say, hey, you know what, in the future, let's let them save however, whatever file extension they want. Then we would know to take however many characters we need. But why would we set up a system like that? It makes no sense. So now that we know what the file name is going to be without the extension, we simply add it to the options, right? The options is the list that we created. So we just do options.add file name. So that'll give us, for each file name, it'll give us an option in our load dialog. So, except, what we need to do now is we need to make sure that our previous options that were there before are actually cleared. So the reason that we need to do this is because when we add options to our dropdown, it just would append to the options that were already there. So if we have a test.xml, the next time we load, we would have 2 test.xml files, and then the next time we would have 3. So we need to clear the options first. And then from there, we can do pattern name which is, remember, that is our drop down, we can do add options and then options, which is our list. And that should allow us to load. And then in the start method, we just call reload options. And then what we'll do is we'll also create another one, which is going to be private void on enable, which is an inherited method, and that is going to also call reload options. So once this is enabled, because once it's on the scene, right, when it gets loaded to the scene the first time, it'll reload the options, which means it'll load all the files that are in the directory. But if we disable it and then re-enable it, even after we save something, new files won't show up because this has already been instantiated. New files wouldn't show up unless we actually restarted it. We don't want to restart it. We want to be able to load the files or reload the files in the file system whenever we enable the load dialog. So this is the onEnable method here that gets called automatically when a game object is enabled. So from here, we need to kind of emulate what we did in the save dialog, and we need to create our basically our quit load dialog, right? So basically we'll just do this, public quit dialog, and that's just going to be game object set active false. Then we want to add the show load dialog, like void show load dialog, or no, that's in the HUD. Also, when we click the load button, load pattern, we also want to set the game object to not active. And again, we're going to basically add stuff to this in another video, because we need to actually then perform all of the stuff that we need to do to actually load in the file, right? Because right now we're just manipulating the dialog boxes. We are closing them, we're opening them, and we're loading files into the drop-down box, and that's pretty much it. We're not actually calling those save and load methods in a game class that we've created yet. So that's going to happen in the next video. But for now, we need to finish up. Well, we're done with this, so let's go ahead and go into the HUD. And we're going to go ahead and create our load dialog property, so that we can associate that with that. And then when we start, we're going to set load dialog game object set active equal to false. And then in here we're going to create a public void load or show load dialog. Oops. And we're going to just simply do load dialog game object set active equals true. Okay. Save the HUD. And then in the game class, we are going to, in the user input, we're going to, instead of load pattern, we're going to call HUD.show load dialog. Okay. So that should be it for all the code. So we can go back in here now, and we have to assign a couple of things. Number one, we have our load dialog here that we need to assign this class to. And then for this pattern name, which is a drop-down, we need to assign this drop-down. And then for the quit button, we need to grab the object, which is going to be in the scene, and it's going to be load dialog, which should be close to somewhere over here. Load dialog. And then the function is going to be quit dialog. And then the load button, same thing, we need to select that object from the scene tab, load dialog, and then the function is going to be load pattern. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and disable that load dialog game object, and I'm gonna just drag the HUD down here. Actually, let's put the HUD up here. This is just preference. There's literally, this doesn't affect anything. Or does it? It might. If we load these first in the, I don't know if there's a load order for these. There might be. So now if we play, we shouldn't have any dialog boxes on the screen. And we don't. We should be able to press L to bring up the load dialog box. And we can't because there's an error. Object reference not sent to an instance of an object. So line 14 in the HUD script. Load dialog. Obviously we didn't set the load dialog in the HUD script. Right here. Maybe we missed something. So we select HUD and then we grab load and basically bring it down here. Oops, we did that in play. So again, press play. If we press L, brings up the load, and here's our test file, right? Without the .xml extension. If we press load, it'll just go away. It's not going to actually load anything. This X button, same thing. S brings up the save dialog. X closes that. S save. Okay, again, we need to deal with these you know, squares still being able to be manipulated while the dialog boxes are up. So basically, there needs to be like a Boolean, right? So we can, do we have time to fix this? We do. Okay. So in the project, if we go to HUD, we can create a variable here and call this, well, we'll make it a Boolean, and HUD active. Can we create an is active? Okay, and is active is going to be false by default. And then if we show any of the dialogues, we're going to is active equals true. And then we also need to reset that. If we dismiss the dialogues. There's no reference to the HUD. In any of these. So I guess we could just add a reference just to keep things simple. We'll add the HUD. Yeah, okay. And then if any of these happen, we set HUD.isActive equal to false. Same thing for the save dialog. We're going to add HUD. It's active. Okay. From here, we just need to go into Unity again. Actually, first, we'll go into the game. And we will limit this input here to only when the HUD is not active. So we can say, actually, yeah, we don't want to do any of this code. If HUD dot, if not, HUD dot is active. So if it's not active. Okay, so let's go into save dialog, and we're going to drag the HUD game object into the HUD property. Same thing for the load. Okay, so now if we press play, we can still edit because the HUD is inactive. But now if we press S to bring up the save, we can't create any, we can't set any to be alive or dead. Right? So it's working exactly how we want it. Same thing with load. The editing is disabled. Load works fine. Close it. Everything is good. So that will mark the end of this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we are actually going to go into how to basically call our save and load methods that we have in our game class from our save and load dialog boxes, so that we can, get all of that to work. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Comments go down below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to check out Patreon. Your support means a great deal to me, and I'll see you guys in the next one.